A war is looming. The EU and China over electric vehicles. An eye-watering 30% on EVs may be planned by the EU. This at a time when the EV boom may be past its prime. What's the real story? And have we had enough of being lectured to about green energy? Petrol heads beware. Car wars are coming. Join me, Jan Darasz, for How We Got Here.
The European Union aims to transition to a more sustainable and low-carbon economy, with a focus on decarbonising the transport system. To achieve this, the electric vehicle revolution is underway. By electrifying road transport, Europe aims to improve air quality and reduce CO2 emissions in cities, aligning with its green policy objectives. China, however, has surged ahead to dominate the electric vehicle market. The Chinese government's robust support through subsidies and tax incentives has catalyzed the industry's growth, propelling it to global leadership. China's EV sales have skyrocketed from 1.3 million to 6.8 million vehicles within 2 years.
I think China has a very, very strong future in terms of its electric vehicle industry. It will be a dominant power in the world for decades to come.
The European Union has recently imposed significant tariffs on electric vehicles imported from China. The decision, while aimed at protecting domestic industries from unfair competition, a move China openly criticizes.
It is a typical double-standard move of the EU restricting Chinese EVs in the name of countervailing subsidies. Because China has stopped its purchase subsidy policy for new energy vehicles by the end of 2022.
In order to mitigate the impact of surging imports from China on strategic industries, particularly in clean technology, the European Commission has introduced the provisional tariffs, ranging from 27% to 48%. These measures are part of a broader strategy to mitigate the impact of surging imports from China on strategic industries, particularly clean technology. However, some voices suggest that clean technologies like EVs are not just any traded goods. They play a pivotal role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and are essential for the EU to meet its legally binding target of net zero emissions by 2050.
I'm delighted to welcome our guest today, Paul Gogoliński, an automotive expert. So welcome to the programme.
Nice to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Great to have you. We'll start off with the proposed tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. Could you sketch in the background why this is happening? It seems to be the prelude to some sort of trade war, but can you just sketch in why the EU is proposing to impose these tariffs on Chinese vehicles?
Indeed. What we're seeing right now is the culmination of a situation that probably started several decades ago when British and global companies opened up their manufacturing bases in China in order to produce and deliver cheaper products. And during that time, of course, the Chinese learned and educated themselves and started producing very, very good products, cheaper. There is a huge question mark over how much of these the production costs are subsidized by the government in China, of course, and that's been the
crux of the matter, isn't it?
That's exactly the crux of the matter, which has been investigated by the EU, and I know that Chinese manufacturers have been cooperating on this. And so what we're seeing now is these tariffs being levied upon those cars because, in a nutshell, the European manufacturers have been rather slow off the mark. So their production costs are higher and they deliver slower. And so it's a bit of protectionism in the end of the day, what's happening here. But you're right, I think it could end up, it's a double-edged sword.
Yes.
So it's going to end up also costing us as well.
What's the level of tariffs, 30%? Is that going to price a lot of potential European buyers out of the market? How do you see? Is it just a case of cost, or, as you said, Chinese quality as well?
Okay. What we see now in Europe is that largely top-end cars, electric cars, are sold very well. So you could say that people with that kind of money normally don't have to count the budget so deeply as people on middle incomes. And so the European manufacturers have been selling these top-end cars in quite good numbers. However, in terms of the mass market, have not really been selling. The Chinese manufacturers, on the other hand, are really targeting that middle section of the population, those people with lower incomes. And so those brands that are coming in are mainly aimed at that particular segment of the population. And I think that this is going to hit our targets, our zero emissions targets long term, because that's where the volume is.
Going to hit positively or negatively? I don't understand what.
Negatively. It's going to result in lower sales of those cars in the middle segment of the market.
In this middle segment, is there a demand there? I mean, is there anything that can rival, in terms of power, range, performance, an internal combustion engine with petrol?
Indeed. Many people, contrary to common perception, actually don't drive that many kilometers every day. Of course, many people go on once or twice or 3 times a year longer holidays, and therefore during those periods perhaps the range of electric vehicle might not be sufficient to cover their entire journey. Many people like to do it in one, especially if we're going skiing to Italy or to Croatia for the summer. So in those circumstances, there are other solutions being developed by manufacturers and dealers alike. For example, replacement vehicle for that period, petrol engine or diesel engine for that period of time, as we wait for the range of electric vehicles to increase. The top-end cars, top-end electric cars, the range is 500, 600 kilometers, whereas those cars in the middle ranges are around about 300, maybe 400 kilometers. So less range. The other thing is that, of course, those cars are very expensive compared to combustion engine cars.
Yes.
And therefore, subsidies or some kind of incentive, financial incentive, are really important for that particular segment of vehicles.
When you say the top end and we're subsidising the EV car sector, aren't we just falling into the same trap of being hoisted on our own petard, on our own rhetorical petard, as we accuse the Chinese of doing?
Okay. In China, the production is apparently heavily subsidized. This is the point of the investigation, which means that the end price to the customer may be unfairly lower than it would be for a European manufacturer. The Chinese, anyway, producing less at a lower price because they started much earlier. The Chinese think long term, and they started on this road quite a few years back. Yes. And they had very clear targets in mind. And therefore, what we're seeing today is basically the result of that. Their first efforts weren't so good, but we're seeing really good products coming through, electric vehicle products coming through. The European cars are more expensive. What we are subsidizing at the moment in Europe, in terms of European cars, is the price. So when somebody goes to buy a vehicle, various countries have different incentives to lower the upfront price of the vehicle. This is in order to actually build critical mass. That is also necessary in terms of production to achieve that lower price long term. We need to be producing more cars more efficiently in order to bring the end price to the customer down.
And the unit cost of an EV compared to a similar internal combustion car, what's the comparison? Generally speaking,
it ranges, of course, depending on the type of vehicle and the accessories and configuration of the vehicle. But you're talking in some cases about 40,000 in Poland zlotys, let's say 10,000 euros or above. But the differential is reducing. It's getting closer now. The manufacturers have been making great efforts in order to bring the prices closer. We shouldn't forget, of course, that electric vehicles are cheaper to service, and therefore, in terms of the total cost of ownership over the long term, should be quite close. depending on the price of electricity in the future.
Sure. Well, yes.
And it's the same with fuel.
It's the big fuel, petrol, electricity. That's the variable.
Correct.
What's the future? We've talked about the top end cars, the saloon cars, the middle sector cars. What about the business end of the economy? Trucks, delivery vans, are they viable as electric vehicles?
In terms of vans, yes, we're seeing very good development in terms of sales of electric vans up to 3.5 tons. Heavy trucks, it's a different story because right now, because of the sheer weight of the tractor unit, which pulls the trailer, and the range, it's really short. So what we're seeing probably on the heavy truck side, more feasible at the moment for long distance transport is LNG, which also significantly reduces the greenhouse gases and nitrous oxides. So that's a good alternative. But in terms of a heavy truck, they're looking at various options, how we can make that more viable and feasible. But definitely up to 3.5 tons, those vehicles are on the road. We see companies who have a policy of going electric on those types of vehicles, including the large courier companies.
Well, yes, I was going to ask you, can you see the white van man driving an electric white van?
If we're talking about the one man and his van, or her van, I'm not sure about that. What we see definitely is the early adopters are those companies who have very strong green credentials, who have made it a very strong strategy to transform their transport over a period of years. And what they're actually doing is they're forcing other companies who want to actually cooperate with them to go the same direction. So if you like, it's a kind of a bottom-up drive at the moment in terms of commercial vehicles. That we're seeing in the markets.
You mentioned, as you draw to a conclusion, you mentioned the subcontracting of production out of Europe into China.
Yes.
In the late 1980s, early 1990s.
Yes.
If we get into a trade war, how do you see that impacting European life in general?
Well,
or will it just impact the economy, the automotive economy?
No, the Chinese are talking about, because they know the pain points. For example, Europe exports a massive amount of pork to China, and they're talking about perhaps levying tariffs on that. But, you know, the Chinese will not slow down. They have very strong strategy. In America, tariffs are 100%, but they import very few Chinese electric vehicles to States, so it's a little bit symbolic. Europe, it's definitely going to hurt. But the Chinese are also building factories in Europe. In Hungary, the first BYD factory. We're talking about here in Poland also building a factory perhaps for Izera in cooperation with a Chinese electric manufacturer. So I believe that what might happen is that we'll see more Chinese manufacturing in Europe, but let us not forget that some European manufacturers also manufacture their cars in China, and those will be affected by the tariffs coming back. So they're cutting off their noses to spite their faces a little bit. So I think this discussion has a long way to run. I think we really need to think very carefully through the process, which I believe it's not being taken lightly. I think that it's being thought through, and I hope that the decision does not create a negative reaction both ways.
Last question to you about the car in general. I mean, I'm not a car owner. I've owned cars. I've ridden motorbikes. I love all the petrol stuff. I love the mechanics. How are you going to sell an electric car to an ordinary European citizen? Or are they going to have to go by bus because the electric car ends up being so dear, so expensive that an ordinary person won't be able to afford it?
No, I believe that the price of electric vehicles will come down over time. As I mentioned earlier, we need to improve the production, reduce the production costs, build the critical mass of those vehicles so it becomes more common to build and sell electric vehicles. If we're selling more volume, then it will help the manufacturers who at the moment, unfortunately, are losing a lot of money building electric vehicles. They're simply not getting a return on their investments. And therefore, that's why they are beginning to swing back into maybe hybrid vehicles, which I think it's a negative step. I think we really need to stay on this path. It's going to be painful. I believe that nobody thought that the transformation to electric was going to be a very smooth ride, to use a motoring terminology. But I think that along the way we will see the transformation happening. And perhaps there will also be hydrogen, could be another alternative in future.
Well, yes. I mean, couldn't we leapfrog in technological terms, leapfrog the battery into another form of combustion engine?
Indeed, the development is going all the time. The research is incredible. We shouldn't forget, of course, that China is also the biggest provider of the raw materials for the battery production. So there are just simply many different aspects to this that really need to be carefully thought through.
Okay, so electric powers should be good for taxi drivers gliding along Warsaw's streets.
Let's hope so.
Paul Gogoliński, thank you for coming along to our programme.
Thank you very much indeed.
That's all we have time for. Do join us next time for How We Got Here.